everybody. I hope you're enjoying being home in the comfort of your pajamas. Thanks for joining us tonight for the Safe Families Q&A. To get started, I'm hoping that these guys can introduce who they are and what their involvement is with St. Peter.
Sure. My name is Brian Booth. I'm the executive director here at St. Peter. And for our marriage, we ended up watching a 3-year-old girl for 3 months, and it was just a great experience. It's been kind of part of us and in our hearts ever since. So to see it come full circle and have St. Peter, our church, now be involved in this and looking to expand this ministry here is just a great thing. So we're excited to be a part of it. We've talked about, as our kids get a little bit older, becoming a host family again, taking in more kids. So just excited to see what God does with Safe Families here at St. Peter.
And my name is Jeff Isola. My wife and I also host as volunteers for Safe Families, but I also work for Safe Families in church engagement, and now more recently also doing development. So I've got 3 daughters that are 10, 8, and 6. And so my wife and I host. We've hosted several kids over the last few years. The longest one was probably for about 6 weeks. So we have experience hosting, and then I help churches like yours when they're either starting a Safe Families ministry or working with the people that are trying to keep the ministry going. And just basically you can think of it as like volunteer support as far as like trying to help get trainings going and just really being the connection from Safe Families to the churches throughout Cook County.
And then I'm Kristen Harmon. I'm the youth ministry leader here at St. Peter, and I'm going to be taking on the role of being our ministry lead for Safe Families here. My husband, Zach, and I, the guy who plays the drums at Contemporary Service, we have hosted a handful of kids now starting about a year ago, and it has just rocked our world and changed our lives and made us grow so close together and just opened our eyes to our neighbors around us. So we're excited to have it be a part of St. Peter. As we're going along, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box and I'll be able to see them right here so that you can help participate in the conversation. I guess to get us started, what do you think would be the goal of having St. Peter be a part of Safe Families? What does that look like?
Yeah. I think it'd be awesome just to see this church consider Safe Families one of our ministries. And see our whole church come around those who are hosting and serving. There's many different ways that you can serve, as we'll talk about. And so I'd love to see Safe Families just be considered. That's one of the ministries that St. Peter lives and breathes and supports. And as many people as possible be involved in that, whether it's through prayer or providing meals or babysitting or maybe becoming a host family. So would love to just see St. Peter rally around it.
And how is St. Peter, or how is Safe Families partnering with churches? What is the connection there?
So Safe Families is, a ministry that is done in the local church. Safe Families started here in Chicago 15 years ago. The person who runs Lydia Home, if you're familiar with Lydia Home, which is started as an orphanage 100 years ago in Chicago, and today has like a residential program and does foster care and those types of things. His name is Dr. David Anderson. He started Safe Families really in an effort to help keep kids out of foster care. It's crisis work that keeps families together. When the parents are facing some kind of a crisis, we work through volunteers that are trained in local churches to temporarily take the kids while there's a trained coach that works with the mom. And when it could be a mom and a dad, it could be just a dad. We typically work with a lot of young single moms. So that coach will work with that mom or those parents until their situation stabilizes, and then the kids go back to living with their parents as opposed to ever having to enter the foster care system.
Got
it. When we did it back 10 years ago, it was actually a success story. So the girl we watched, her parents were able to straighten out the issues that they were having, and they were ready to receive her back into their family and their home again. So it was a really good feeling. It was obviously sad to say goodbye to her. But we stayed in touch with the parents and the family, and to see her go back into a situation that was a good one showed the success of the ministry. So it was cool.
And in our hostings, we've dealt with a mom who was hospitalized for short periods of time due to an illness. One of the moms was working multiple jobs and unable to have time to go find daycare for her child. So we just provided a little bit of time for her to be able to go apply for government daycare. What other sorts of crisis might parents be going through?
Well, 70% of the moms that call us or referred to us are homeless at the time that they call. So homelessness is a big challenge. And the population that we help is, the term they use is socially isolated. So I always tell people, like I said, I have daughters. If something were to happen to me, my wife has, a cell phone of her side of the family, my side of the family, and tons of friends from church and family, that she's accumulated over the years. So it's very unlikely she would ever need to use a ministry like Safe Families to help with our kids, because we just have so much support, as many people do. But the moms that we help typically are socially isolated, and so they either don't have people that can call in a time of crisis, or the people that they can call, they just don't trust with their children because they're not safe. So homelessness is a big challenge, and the mom could be going through, like you said, a variety of crises.
I see one of our online questions coming in. For those that may be interested in becoming a host family, what does that process look like? How long does it take to be ready to do that?
Sure. So becoming a host, there's a few different things involved. There's an online application that has what you might imagine, your name and address, and it'll ask for references and so forth. We would ask you to go to you need to go to a training, whether that would either be live at a local church. There's a webinar coming up, which I can get you a link to if I didn't do that already, so they can do it in that format, or there's also always an online training. So there's an application, there's a training. We would do what's called a home screen. So someone from Safe Families would come visit you in your home. It typically takes 90 minutes to 2 hours, just depending on how big your home is, how many questions you have. Everything's a little bit different, but that's usually what it is. And then part of the process is a background check, which means you would get fingerprinted, and then they would, of course, check that to make sure all the volunteers are safe, that the kids are staying with. And that's really what takes the longest typically, because then we're just waiting for the results, and that just typically takes weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, I would say on average.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How about those that maybe aren't at a place where they can be a host family? What other ways are there that people from St. Peter could serve this ministry?
Sure, yeah. So I always tell people there's really something anybody can do. Obviously, again, it's a Christian ministry. We would certainly, the first thing we'd ask you to do is pray. Pray for the families that we're trying to help, pray for the host families, and just everybody involved in the ministry, of course. And then there's hosting. There's a role we call family friends, which is, there's several different ways that can look, but family friends help with things like transportation. So sometimes, the child needs to get from their parents, from their mom, to, if Kristen, for example, is hosting, to Kristen. And sometimes maybe they'll go part way, what Kristen's experienced specifically, but transportation of the children or the mom, sometimes usually the children, babysitting sometimes, supporting the host families is an important thing. Sometimes the host families really appreciate it. If somebody drops off a meal, what we call resource friends, where people might provide diapers or formula or those kinds of things. Of course, donations is a big thing always. We've got a matching grant that's available from now until the end of the year, where there's an organization that's going to match all the donations that come in to Safe Families between now and the end of the year, that I can tell you about. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Someone asked, how long does it take to become? Oh no. How does the background check cost any money for potential host families?
Not to the host. We don't pass along any expenses to the host family, which is part of the reason we need donations, like I said. So yeah, there is a fee that Safe Families, or depending on how it's set up, the church. So if one way or the other, the host family wouldn't pay. Lots of times at the live trainings, there's fingerprinting right there that people can take advantage of, or else if they do the training online or through a webinar, we can give you a location where you can go, and there's a variety of offices. They can go get, not Safe Families offices, but offices where you can get fingerprinted.
Is there a checklist for what you would need at a home visit to prepare?
So the home visits are really a time to answer questions. We do walk through the house. What a home visit means is one of us would come and we would walk through the whole home. And they do ask ask us to like look inside every door. So not cabinets or dresser drawers, but any closet door, any bedroom doors, things like that. So we walk through the whole home. And then, if there's anything obvious that's not safe, but beyond that, it's just, you can think of the safety features almost as like baby proofing, kind of like, just talking to you about, hey, staircases or, things like that. There's a safety checklist that we talk through, but there's really nothing you would need to do, I wouldn't say, to prepare for a home screen. I mean, people of course feel the urge to straighten up their house, just like anytime you have company, but yeah.
Yeah, I remember being nervous for the home visit, and then it was very laid back, and they were just making me aware of various things toddlers might hurt themselves on and telling me to be aware of that.
Yes,
So.
and for anyone who's had children, it's really, a lot of it is like, of course we know that, but it's just something we do, obviously, because we want to keep the children safe. We don't take things for granted, so.
That's something interesting that I'd like to point out. I think that a lot of people have heard my story and Brian and Kelly's story of how before children, right when they first got married, it was just the perfect time to host a child. Is that a typical situation, or what does a host family typically look like? Do they have kids? Do they not have kids?
That's another great question, and so it's been interesting because I think for different families, at different seasons in their life, they feel like it's the right time. We certainly have, I guess to answer your question most directly, probably if we were to look at the actual data, probably most of the host families, I would say, do have children the age of the children they host. So what I mean by that is, one important thing to know is the host families always make all the decisions as far as who are they going to host, when are they going to host. So like I said, I've got 3 young daughters. My wife and I have chosen to only host other little girls. That's just what we've decided to do. Some people, don't let that weigh in, be a factor in their decision. So I would say that most of the families do have children when they're hosting, but some certainly host when they're, before they have children. We do have host families that say, okay, my kids have gone off to college. Now we feel like our house is empty. We're empty nesters. Now is a good time for us. So it really does vary.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Someone asked, Brian and Kristen, did you have to change or fix anything in your home? We didn't.
Yeah.
They just made sure we had little plugs in the outlets.
Right. I don't think so, partly because we were nervous about it, like you said. So I think we made sure everything was in the right place and everything was taken care of. So I don't think we had to change or fix anything. Yeah.
And I do home screens. I've done, I've done a couple dozen of them. I'm sure somebody has had to change. There's been things, I would say the biggest thing is probably like a baby gate, honestly. Like, again, if you think of it as if you're going to drop off, those of you who have children, if you had little kids and you're dropping them off at, an aunt or uncle that doesn't have kids, and you're going to their house like, oh, shoot, you got to remember to move that, or, my son will throw it on the floor. It's those kind of things. For the most part, what I've seen in home screens.
And we've talked about hosting babies or young toddlers, but the needs are really across the board, right? So there's maybe a 10 or 12-year-old sometimes that needs a safe place too.
There is. So 70, again, the number again is 70%. That 70% of the kids we host are 5 and under, but a lot of that's typically who the families kind of are willing to host. So there are always older kids that are just a little more difficult to place with host family. There's just less host families that are willing to take them. But yeah, so safe families will host kids from 0 to 18.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we actually know about a hosting before the child's even born.
Yeah. That
we know when the child's born, they need a place to go.
Yeah. One of the questions I remember getting a lot when we did it was, what's the difference between this and foster care? Obviously, we already talked about the goal is to have them go back to their family and their parents. That's probably the biggest one, but what else is different from foster care?
So, to become a foster parent, there's a lot more involved. I'm not a social worker. I don't know exactly, but I know, for example, the home, they call it a home study versus a home screen, is a lot more involved. But yeah, we're trying to keep kids out of foster care. And so this is voluntarily by the mom. The mom is, voluntarily putting her children with safe families. And at any time, they can ask to take that child back. Now, when they place their child with safe families, the mom does have goals, right? So we don't, the mom might just call and say, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I heard about you guys. We want to see if I can get X amount of days someone can watch my children. And it might start out that way. But then the coaches in the intake office kind of start to, find out more about the situation. They ask questions and kind of drill down on, well, what's mom really going through? What does she need? And they help her figure that out. They help create a timeline of how long the hosting will be. And then, for example, if what she needs is to find housing, then they find out about her situation, her income, and everything that's going on, and what housing is going to look like for her. And they work through that. So a lot of it is that it's voluntary, and it's definitely temporary. Sometimes the hosting is just overnight, a weekend. On average, the average right now is 40 some days, like 43 days, but it's short-term temporary.
Okay.
So someone asked, how do you decide how long a child will stay with you? Like, you get a text message that has a general idea of what the timeline might look like, and you never have to say yes, but I just sit and wait for the right child to come along and just prayerfully wait for that.
I see my wife chiming in. She said I'm forgetful. We did have to move our cleaning products from the floor to a high cabinet shelf. So minor. But we had to change something.
That's
like remodeling.
That's a perfect example of what I meant by what I'm calling baby proofing, of like, there's your kids have gotten older and it's like, oh shoot, there's a toddler coming over, we gotta move things.
Yeah.
So you said that some training can be, or some hostings can be just overnight. What would be the longest that a child would stay with you?
Well, I believe on our website it might say up to a year. In reality, there are always kind of those at the far end of the spectrum where mom is just going through challenge after challenge, and then there's communication that obviously would stay. So I don't know what the longest would be, but typically it's much less than a year. There are ones that go for months. The child that my wife and I have been hosting most recently is what we call respite. So when that child went into Safe Families, the coaches in the intake office realized that the hosting was going to be about 6 months long, and they were able to place that child in that hosting. Some people prefer longer hostings for whatever reason. They feel like they can develop more rapport with the mom, which is something we try to do whenever possible. But in any case, this hosting is about 6 months long. But they knew that there were several weekends where they were going to need help. They just had their volunteers. They had things on their schedule, weddings, whatever it was, where they had things going on. And so the Safe Families office matched, their family up with my family. And so for various weekends throughout there, we've been taking her on Friday night. We meet up with them. We take the child on Sunday morning, Sunday after church, Sunday afternoon. Her name is Peyton. She's a 2-year-old girl. She goes back to not her mom, but to the other host family. And when I believe it was about 6 months, when the 6 months is up, she's on schedule to go back to her real mom.
Someone asked, if a child is staying with a host family long term, can they take the
state? Then we have to get the mom has to approve that, right? The biological mom, we call them the placing parent. The placing parent would have to approve that, which typically she's done at the beginning when the placement takes place. But yeah, you can certainly take the children anywhere you're going to go.
Yep. I've taken a kid to Michigan and to my parents' house for the weekend. Worked out well. How about with school? Do they stay in the school where their family lives, or go to school close to the host family if they're school aged?
So either situation can happen. Certainly most of the time they stay in their own school district. The children are going through a lot, right? It's a big change to have to move into a host family for, especially for for any child, but for a little kid. And so, again, the short answer is the coaches would kind of look at the situation with you and with the placing mom and say, this is what we think makes the most sense. And most of the time that means the children stay in their own school district. The children, when they come to stay with a host family, have things become available to them because they're technically homeless, because that's when they go to live with you. It's because they don't have somewhere else to stay, right? This is only crisis work. And so because they don't have anywhere to stay, they're technically homeless, and things become available to them. And one of those things is going to be transportation to their school district. Now, like I said, this one child we're hosting, she's a 2-year-old, and that hosting 6 months long. Well, let's just say if that happens with a 5th grader, for example, then if it's going to be a long hosting, then there will be times when they will transfer the child into the host family's school district, but that can obviously create a lot of challenges for the child. So.
Okay. What if I want to host but I have to work? could I get a babysitter?
I can chime in on that. When we did it, my wife and I were both working, and the only reason we could do it was we had 2 different friends from our church who went through the training and traded off days watching her during the day. So unless it's changed, I think that's still definitely a possibility.
Yep, that certainly is. And so Safe Families tries to take advantage of, anything that you can think of. Sometimes, there's after school programs, again, just like, any child might be in an after school program if their parent is single or if both parents are working. And daycare also is sometimes available. Again, that's case by case. I won't take up time going through the details. But sometimes there's funds available for daycare. So it's really always a case by case situation. But certainly babysitting is available. Is an option. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. I'm just curious. This is my question. What is the greatest joy that you've experienced as a host family or as a family friend for someone? Like, is there like a moment where you're like, this is why it was worth it?
I think for us, just seeing the development of the little girl that we watched over those 3 months, and just how much she learned and grew and was happy, and then, like I said, being able to put her back into a situation that we knew was good and right to be back with her mom was a good thing. So we also had a good relationship with the parents. We brought them to church a few times, and so that was kind of a special moment to develop that. So just the whole experience. I mean, it gets in your heart and it stays with you. And just to see how God uses you through that to impact others, but then he changes you and changes your heart through it as well.
Yeah.
Have you had a really cool moment?
There's so many just fun times just with the kids themselves. Even this last little girl, Peyton, she's always cracking us up. So it's kind of like, I guess, kind of a lighthearted reason or whatever that comes out of it is we just have fun with them. But then one thing that we didn't really expect, I don't think, is it seems to have had a positive effect even on our own kids, and our kids love doing it. In a lot of ways, it's not any different than having another to them. And once the child's in our house, than watching a niece or a nephew, like one of their cousins or friends came and stayed. But it just had a positive effect on our kids, when they hear that there's a child that needs a home, they'll always be like, Daddy, we can take him, So, there's so many positive things that it's like other things in the church, like when you start serving, you're doing it to help somebody else, and then you end up getting the benefit from it sometimes,
I have similar experiences with my nephews when I bring a child to my parents' house to see them be like, oh, so-and-so is coming, and they are really excited to make a new friend, and they just like hold their hand and welcome them and hug them, and like it's just the most beautiful thing. And then for them to talk to them about, oh, well, he doesn't have this, so he might not be used to it. It's just a really good learning experience for my nephews that I've witnessed, so it's really cool. My biggest joy has been one of the hostings that I had that was a little longer term, the relationship that I was able to form with the mom, and just to be able to speak joy and light and encouragement into her life when she was feeling really down and like she couldn't handle it. Just to be there as like her cheerleader was really fun for me. And plus her kid was super cute and happy, so that's always a pick.
I'd say too, just knowing you guys and Zach, just being kind of a chill, like cool guy, and how he's just melted by these kids, and how God's at work in him through this too has been cool to watch. Yeah.
Yep. The kids they're always a little thrown off at first, but Zach always brings out a football, and that always breaks the ice.
Yeah.
So. Someone asked, what if I host and the child needs medical care? I know that was a big concern for me before we hosted.
So as far as, so as a question, so the children virtually always do not have private insurance. They almost always have Medicaid, Medicare. So they'll have a medical card. Is that the way the question is going? Is like the process of what happens with
Where would you take
Medicare?
them?
Yeah.
Your
Can
own
you
doctor.
go to any doctor?
Yeah, so they would have, Medicaid or Medicare, and you could take them to, any emergency room in the state of Illinois has to take that. Urgent care clinics, what I've been told, is kind of hit and miss, so you just have to check with the one that's by you. And certainly, yeah, your doctor would take that. We've not had to do that ever. I mean, we did have one time where my kids were going to the dentist anyways, and so my wife just asked the dentist. She kind of briefly explained what Safe Family was. That it was kind of like foster care, but not really. Through our church, and that was all he said. That was all she said, and the dentist said, "Yeah, I'll check her teeth." And she ended up having a cavity, and they made phone calls to the mom and so forth, and she got a cavity filled, and the dentist was like, "Don't worry about it." So you hear these kind of stories, as far as things I've heard that happen. But as far as like the insurance side of it, they'll have a card. The emergency rooms would take it, and you'd be covered as far as that go. Through the training, we talk about a lot of these kinds of things. One thing we do always tell people in the training is, if there were ever an emergency, you wouldn't want to ever sign anything, right? Like, you're not their parent. You wouldn't, if you ever take the child to the emergency room, you would never sign, "Yes, I'll pay for all of their medical bills. Yes, my life." That's not what we're going to do. So.
Okay. If anyone else has questions, feel free to throw them in the chat box. If not, I just kind of wanted to tell you guys, okay, what are next steps? If you would like to be a resource friend, a family friend, or a host family, you can go to fullifeinchrist.org/safefamilies, and there I've created some Google forms that you can fill out, and it'll help me get in contact with you. It'll help me get you, if you are a family friend or host family, it'll help me connect you to application, training opportunities that Jeff shares with me, background check information. If you fill out the resource friend form, it'll help me have an idea of what sort of supplies you have, how you want to help, and then when a need arises, I'll be able to pair you with the family that would need that.
Kristen, I would just add, if you're joining us live or if you're watching this later on, that's not a mistake. I think God is probably doing something in your heart, in your life. I remember when we first were introduced to the ministry, just being super skeptical and thinking, we just got married, we need to focus on us, we can't do this, but my wife was just sold out on it and convinced that we needed to do it. And now looking back, she was right, and God used it just in awesome ways. So I would just say, follow that prompting, even if it feels a little bit scary or a little bit uncomfortable, whatever that level of serving is that He's calling you to, just follow it, take that next step, maybe go through the training and see what God does through that. But it's not by mistake that you're watching this, that you're joining us here. Yeah.
Awesome.
How do we find dates, times, and locations for trainings?
So they're on the website. It can be a little, you have to click a few times, but if you want to look now, you can go on the website and then go to locations, and then it's going to say Chicago, which when we say Chicago and say families, we mean basically the northern half of Illinois. So we would have trainings there. But another way to make it easier for you is I can send links to Kristen that she can make available to you. But they're on the website. We have to click around a little bit. I don't know if I can explain that briefly right now.
So if you fill out the forms on our website, I'll connect you with training. I already have a couple links. So if you have any questions about any of that, you can always email me too at kharman@fullifeinchrist.org. KHARMAN @fullifeinchrist.org. Other than that, I think all of the questions have been answered. Unless anybody has any last minute ones. Oh, yep, there is. Will we have a chance to connect with other St. Peter families who will be involved with Safe Families in some way? So I can go ahead and answer that. Once you fill out those forms and I start to get an idea of what we're working with, how many host families, how many family friends, I would love to get us all together and find a way to become a circle of support and to all support each other in that. Also, there's something really neat. Right now, I'm the only active host family, but there's a lady who goes to Prince of Peace in Palatine who helps me babysit, and I help her babysit. So there's other connections in this area too. So I'm hoping between all of that, we're going to be able to support each other, and I'm excited to get all those connections going. Other than that, I
Should we
think
pray
we're
and
good to
close
go.
this out?
That is a great idea, brother.
Me too.
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
Father, we just thank you for this day, for this night. Thank you for those joining us on the live stream and those that may be watching later on. God, we just thank you for this ministry of Safe Families and how you're using it to help so many families, so many children that are just in a desperate spot of need. God, would you work through our people, through St. Peter, open their hearts and their homes and their lives to these kids and these families. and just use it in awesome ways, not only to help the families, but to change the people that are being involved. We want this all for your glory, Jesus, and we pray for each person to just know what their next right step is in this process. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you guys for joining us.